Okay, welcome to Extermination Radio, the alternative Doom radio podcast where we talk about the 1993 video game Doom and Doom 2 and level design, and we also talk about like gameplay and what's going on in the community and stuff. And today I have a very special episode. I'm here with somebody who is very influential to me. I'm here today with American McGee.
Hey John, how's it going?
It's good, man. I'm glad you took the time to be on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's always fun to travel back in time 20 plus years and talk about Doom.
Yeah. Well, Doom is a major part of my life. I've played Doom. I was about 3 years old when the game came out, and my brothers came home with like a floppy disk with the shareware on it, and they installed it on our computers, and I got to play it for the first time when I was like 4. So it's something that's been sticking to my life for a pretty long time. I kind of got away from it a little bit like in my younger years, but I picked it up again when I was like 14 when I found out about the Doom community, which has just a whole group of people who are designing new levels and stuff for Doom. And so as part of the Doom community, I've seen a lot of people discuss Doom 2's levels and the designs and stuff, and a lot of people seem to agree that you're one of the best. You're one of the best level designers on the team. Like you've designed like probably the best looking levels in Doom.
That's very sweet to hear. I really appreciate that. That was, again, it was a very long time ago when I was working on that. Obviously, it was the first game company that I ever worked for, the first game I ever worked on. But I think at that time, I was so young, passionate, and bent on, sort of not getting fired. That it I think drove me to take the work really seriously and to try to bring something consistent and creative to it. So I'm glad to hear that effort is still recognized all these years later.
What were you doing before you got involved with id Software?
I was a car mechanic.
Really?
So I dropped out of high school when I was 16 years old due to kind of family, personal problems. But I ended up going to work on cars. I was working on German cars like Volkswagens, Porsches, and Audis, and I was actually quite all right with that. I mean, I was a good mechanic. I could take and replace the clutch in a VW bus in a half hour. Drop the engine and take the transmission out, put a new clutch in, and come home every day covered in grease, sometimes setting myself on fire. But it was a satisfying, a real job that you put your hands on stuff, and at the end of the day, you knew you'd fix something. And but I ended up moving into an apartment near to where John Carmack was living, and he and I became friends, and sort of the rest was history. He started inviting me up to id to do testing initially on the original Doom, and
Wow.
Then he offered me a job. And the first job was to answer the phone and to do tech support for customers who were playing its old games, from Doom to Wolfenstein and prior games.
Wow.
Hold on a second.
Oh, that's okay.
There we go. And so I went from doing tech support while I was answering the phones. I started teaching myself how to do level design. And that quickly turned into something where the rest of the team recognized that the quality of content that I was producing was as good as what the team was making. So they transferred me over and said, right, we'll start making maps for the games, and went on from there.
That's pretty cool. Did you design, were some of the first levels that you designed, did they land in the game?
Yeah, I think that actually that was the thing that was kind of interesting. I think actually some of the very first things that I built that weren't sort of like throwaway test maps. I think I came out the gate building maps that were usable. Almost, I think the first and second maps that I built ended up being stuff that I eventually ended up turning into content that was used in the games.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool.
And I spent a lot of time doing research and thinking about why it was that maps were interesting and why we enjoyed playing them. Of course, deathmatch was a big part of it. So I was really into very minimalist, very fast maps, and I was taking a lot of cues from. So there's a Japanese architect named Tadao Ando, who builds a lot of minimalist, architecture where he'll use very simple materials like just poured concrete, and then the buildings come alive because of the lighting inside of them. That's where the really interesting play on geometry and light comes in. And so I was taking a lot of inspiration from him, and then I was also looking at a lot of Middle Eastern architecture, because there was a similar thing happening there where they had very simple design kind of rules and then building materials, but they did a lot where they built areas which had a lot of interaction with the light inside the spaces, light and shadow. And so that became a really big kind of driver for why and how I built maps. And it was also one of the reasons why I became so attracted to lava as the building material, because it's not just a hazard, but it's also a light source. I was really infatuated with with light sources, and so
Yeah, I get that impression from your maps too, especially the focus. It's one of the most delicately designed maps as far as lighting goes. Because there's a part where you can switch on the lights, and there's other parts where there's almost lighting gradients. You have these sectors that are shadows, and then there's layered sectors after that kind of gently, each sector is a little bit brighter than the next one, and it kind of creates these warm glows in the map. And I've always thought that lighting is extremely important to making a map look good, and I think some people do forget that when they're designing their own maps. Is that I run into a lot of people in the Doom community who are trying to design their own custom maps, and they have a lot of difficulty coming up with good-looking designs. And I think what they forget is that you can really make a map come to life just with the lighting alone. It doesn't really have to have so much to do with the amount of detail and effort that you put into the architecture behind it.
I think there's something very you kind of have to have an obsessive compulsive personality to get the balance between the spaces, the lighting, and then the use of textures in a way that wherever you stand in a map, you've kind of got a photograph. You've got something that looks interesting, either because you've got a long hallway you're looking down with interesting light, but there's darkness on either side, and so it's a bit foreboding, and you wonder what's going on there, or the way you turn a corner in the lighting, or the way the textures line up. It's all sort of telling a story. And a lot of times when I would look at the sort of community built maps, of course, in the worst sort of examples, you see people just slap texture all over everything, and they don't line stuff up, and they don't care that their stairs don't have a properly aligned lip on the front of them, and they're committing all kinds of sins, and then never mind that they're not really paying attention to or thinking about the lighting. But that was the thing. When we were building our maps within id, there was a constant competition, especially between myself and Romero, to generate scenes. Each and every area that you went into had to be visually striking and interesting, and pushing the engine, and but at the same time looking like a place that could have existed, something that could have been built, and something that could have been lived in, or like that. So there was a lot going into, even in those days when the maps were so simple, there was a lot going into the thinking about how to design and lay out and light those maps.
That's awesome. Do you remember what kind of maps do you think were probably in closest competition with Romero's? Do you remember any one of Romero's maps that was particularly impressive to you?
Well, I'm going to be terrible at the map names. There's no way I'm going to be as good at the map names as you are, or even as he would. He's got an encyclopedic knowledge of the maps. To this day, I have to be honest with you, I've sort of half forgotten which maps I made and which, and I have to go and look at the internet to find out, oh yeah, right, I made that map.
Yeah.
So
that's okay.
Yeah.
We are talking about a 20-year-old game here, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's. Yeah, I've always really liked your maps. They have a very they're very attractive. They're just very interesting. They probably have some of the best looking maps. And when I think of them, I think of in most dens. which is kind of like in the middle of Doom 2, which is like it's like a brown brick type of map, and there's like an ocean that surrounds like this island of like kind of like these castle-y type buildings. But I guess I don't know. It's pretty. It's a cool thing though, because you have like these cool like decorative archways and stuff, and you don't really see a whole lot of that in Doom.
Yeah. So as you're talking about this, so I'm just going to Google Images and pulling up screenshots of this. So I mean, I remember this map now that I'm looking at it here. And yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was saying about trying to get inspiration from. This was actually mostly from Middle Eastern architecture. So I had a bunch of books in my office.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that were all about sort of stone built, ancient architecture. And I just, I'd sit down and it would just be sort of like all about playing with materials. It was like we were, sitting there and building out these worlds, and they were real. And I think for myself and Romero, trying to get that sense of immersion for the player was really, really important. And we did have, Sandy Peterson on the design team, who his focus wasn't about the visual immersion. He was more interested in the tricks and the traps. And
yeah, that's what most people seem to agree on.
And he was really good at that, but he almost would throw the visual stuff out the window in order to achieve the gameplay goal. And and obviously, I mean, a lot of his maps turned out being really fun. But I think for myself and for Romero, trying to find a way to blend those two things together was really important to us. And that was where the competition between the two of us existed, in terms of trying to make the game look as beautiful as possible, while at the same time having interesting and fun gameplay. And of course, Romero and I also like tricks and traps. I mean, I was a huge fan of surprising the player with pitfalls and filling rooms with exploding barrels, and setting up scenarios where you had to kind of play it once and die, and then play again in order to get through it properly. So there was, at that time, I mean, not that much really we could do. I mean, we had a very limited palette in terms of the things we could use to build the game. And, it was difficult at that time to try to think, how to push the envelope and what to do with the tech. But it was this constant thing where you sat down for, 16, 18 hours a day and just hammered away at stuff, trying to make it fun.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Speaking of Sandy Peterson, I know that you designed the level in Doom 2, Dead Simple. That's the one with all the mancubi that are like on these platforms firing fireballs at you. The big fat guys with the flamethrowers. And there was like an original design for Sandy Peterson, and it was released a few years ago when John Romero he shared a bunch of like old unused Doom 2 assets, and we got to see some of the maps before they were like refinished and used in Doom 2. And I remember reading somewhere that like you saw that Sandy Peterson's version of Dead Simple, and it was like this it looked like a vacant lot with like these closets with monsters in them. And you were like, we can't put this in the game. We got to make a new map. And you designed Dead Simple, which is one of my favorite maps in the game.
Right.
Yeah, it's Dead Simple is actually pretty influential for what's going on in the Doom community today, because Dead Simple is like a very fast-paced. It's different than like most maps that you would think of in Doom, because like what some people describe as Doom is it's kind of like this dungeon crawler type of game where you're kind of going through like these big like non-linear layouts with like halls and corridors and occasional traps and things like that. But Dead Simple is kind of like a map where you kind of have to use the entire arena to deal with this particular like combat puzzle where you're being attacked from every angle. And like in the community today, there's people designing what we describe as slaughter maps, which is like Dead Simple times 1,000. So like instead of fighting like 6 or 7 mancubi like you would, you're fighting like a couple hundred, and they're like all stacked together in these armies on towers and like huge groups below. But you do have to like utilize all of the space in order to complete this puzzle. Right. And
yeah. I don't remember the story about the Sandy Peterson map. I mean, that doesn't really ring a bell.
Okay, so maybe it was kind of embellished.
Yeah, but I know looking at this map, I do remember building this, and I remember building it really quickly. But at the time, I was into, so we would do a lot of experiments, and especially related to deathmatch. And there would be times where I would tell the guys, or Romero would tell me, or somebody, I'm launching a new map, jump in there and we're going to test it. And from time to time, I would put up a map that was just a room that, in real life terms might not have been more than like 10 meters across, with 2 spawn points in it and then weapons in the middle. So you're basically talking like a cargo container with rocket launchers in it. and we would jump in there. But the thing was, we'd jump in there and play it for a half hour and laugh our heads off. We'd think it was the funniest thing and it was the most fun thing in the world, right? It wasn't about running around hunting each other down and trying to, and there was absolutely no way to have a score. There was no scorekeeping in there. We just would spawn, you'd run forward, you'd grab the rocket launcher, and then blow the other guy up, and you'd probably blow yourself up, and then you would just do this over and over and over again. So we had a lot of maps that were kind of like that. They were just sort of pure concept, just like what happens if a map is just an L-shaped map, 2 cargo containers put together. What happens if the map is just, sort of 2 floors separated by not a lot. And that was like when I got into the Quake days, and I started building maps like DM4, which was really small and really fast. A lot of that came out of my sort of thinking that, like, I want to spawn and I want to be engaged in a battle right away. I don't want to spawn like, half a map away from somebody or on the other side of a map, and then it's going to take a long time to get to them. You just want to have this constant. And I remember Dead Simple being one of those maps that I don't know how it came about or why, if it had anything to do with Sandy, but I remember it being one of those maps that I built for deathmatch. I was just like, we just need like a really simple map, really fast, really open. There's nowhere to hide. And yeah, it's a slaughterhouse, right? And there's a lot of fun to be had in that. There's a lot of fun to be had in Simple.
Yeah, one of my first projects when I first got into like Doom level design was I had this idea to I think what happened is I downloaded this level set for Doom called Gothic Deathmatches, and it's a very beautiful looking set of deathmatch levels, but I didn't have anybody to play deathmatch with because I think I had an internet connection problem or something. For whatever reason, I didn't have internet in my house for a few days. And so I took these set of maps, and I opened them up in a Doom editor, and I started putting monsters in them for fun. And what I found is that the level design that works for deathmatch also works really well for the single player too. And so like I started cramming all these monsters and stuff in there, and it gave me the idea for my first project, which is called Motor Nerve. And I designed this set of levels that were intentionally designed for deathmatch in mind, but then I just crammed it full of monsters too, so that you could play them on single player. And it works surprisingly well. The kind of like the nonlinear aspect of the level design, and like being attacked from all different angles, that made Doom very chaotic and exciting for me. And so it's interesting how like these 2 different gameplay styles, whether it's single player killing monsters or killing each other, killing Marines killing each other, these 2 like this simple like level design concept of making like multiplayer centric levels, they work in both ways. It's interesting how that works together.
Have you it was like a year ago or something, there was a game that came out called Devil Daggers on Steam?
Yes, yeah.
And when I saw that, like the hairs stood up on my, I was like, wow, this is really cool, because you don't see it that often anymore. But it was really fast paced. It was really brutal. There's nowhere to hide. And I, seeing that just made me kind of like think back to how much fun those early, FPS games were, because they were really fast paced. There was not the subtlety of the architecture and the lighting, and you didn't have a lighting and level designer trying to like get in the way and shove story and stuff, their technical ability in your face. It was just like, it was you, a gun, and some corridors to run down and try to stay alive in. And yeah, when I saw Devil Daggers, I was like, oh, so the world needs more stuff like this. It looked really, really fun.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people in the Doom community would complain about, especially if you, at least like 5 or 10 years ago, there was like this craze for like modern military shooters like Call of Duty and Medal of Honor and stuff, and they all had like these very linear progressions, and like it's a very you're just kind of like, it almost seems like you're just walking down a hallway and the game is telling you what to do, and then in between that there's like cutscenes, and they're just kind of like ramming these stories down your throat, and that's it's remarkable to me, because if these people are putting so much attention to making cutscenes, I don't know why they're not just making movies. It's like why don't they just like it's I don't know. Like, what's so fun about Doom is that you're running around really fast, and you have control over your player, and you can do whatever you want. And the tools, like, you have monsters in front of you, and there's tools to destroy them, and you just kind of like mess around. Devil Daggers is a pretty cool game, though.
That's exactly. I think that is the sort of subtle, slide towards the technology being capable of telling story. And in presenting environments that rival what you'd see in a film, and from a design perspective, if you've got access to that, it's everybody wants to be a game designer, everybody wants to be a filmmaker too, and so I think this was something that we saw happening at id in the last days when I was there, was this movement towards trying to make the engine do things that weren't necessarily about gameplay. They weren't necessarily about the things that made id great. When I got to id, it was like your story. The first thing I had ever played was the original Wolfenstein, which I'd bought at a computer swap meet on a 3-inch floppy disk, and I was hooked. I think everybody was hooked on the speed of and the brutality of this experience. I mean, you go back and look at it now, and it was a 320 by 240 pixel mess. I mean, your brain can barely compute what it is anymore. But there was something very visceral about it. And then the irony is that a company like EA some years later creates a division where they make action games and they call it visceral, but all the visceral business of what we had come to love about FPSs was completely stripped out of it. So I think stripping back, the visuals and stripping back the storytelling, it leads to a completely different type of experience, and it's a kind of experience we don't get enough of these days. Yeah,
that kind of like very simplistic kind of style. A lot of people refer to Quake when they're thinking of like these new modern, or not modern, games that are like kind of bringing back that retro old school style. Like you see a lot of in the game descriptions, they'll try to like describe the game as being like Doom or Quake like, or inspired by it in that way.
Right.
And a lot of it has to do with that kind of simplicity, the way things look things look like the things they're supposed to look like, and the environments are like kind of abstract in a way where like you can understand their physical proportions, but and still get like kind of the image of what it's trying to be, but it's not like in your face. You're not colliding with like all kinds of like junk that's on the ground and little details that kind of like communicate the atmosphere better. And Devil Daggers is a pretty good example of that, because it is kind of like there isn't a whole lot of it's not very clear exactly where you are or what you're experiencing, but the gameplay is all there, and that's the intent. That's where all the attention is drawn to.
Well, the feeling can still be there. It doesn't matter how few pixels you have to work with. You go back and you play something like Doom, where you've got sprite-based blood splatters, you're still going to get that reaction, and you're still going to be in that moment. It's not necessary for that to be a, HD 4K experience with, realistic blood splatter particles. I think a lot of times that stuff can kind of get in the way. And that's, it's coming from like me being someone who, when I left id, then kind of got involved in more storytelling type games. But I also got away from the FPS genre. I went to a third-person perspective. It was intentionally slowed down to become a story-based game. So then when I look back, and I would go back and try to play an FPS, play a Call of Duty or play one of these games. And it was like you said, it was like, well, this isn't what I wanted. I mean, this is basically like, we've stuck, storytelling on a rail with a shotgun in your hand, but that's not really where this all came from, and it's not really what I'm looking for in this experience. So, if I want a storytelling game, I want to go play BioShock. If I want an action game, I'd much prefer something really fast and really fluid and really visceral like a Doom or a Quake.
Yeah. Was deathmatch like really important at id Software?
It was massively important. I mean, it was where we spent. So that was the funny thing. Is like at that time we were all really young and we didn't really care. We didn't have a life outside of work. But I mean, we were in the office for at least 16 hours a day, sometimes 18 hours a day. But the funny thing was, like, all that time wasn't necessarily being spent on making the games. Probably something like 8 hours a day was going to deathmatch, and then the other 10 hours a day was focused on actual development work. But of course, then that 10 hours also had lunch and dinner in it and stuff like that. So
wow,
I'd say that as much time was spent on playing deathmatch every day as was spent on building. But our excuse was that, of course, we were building the maps. And so, I would be building my map, and then John would come over and say, hey, my map's ready to be tested. Get in there. Of course, he'd be a lot less polite about it. It was always a very rude environment.
Really?
But, he'd say, get in there. And so myself and Sean and whoever else was available would jump in and then play the map for an hour, with the idea being to generate feedback. And then, he'd get his feedback and he'd go back to his level design. And then maybe an hour later, I'd pop up and say, right, I've just finished a build of my map. Let's go in and test. So this is happening, 3, 4, 5 times a day. And we didn't necessarily test our maps in single player first or foremost. A lot of times it was play testing the maps in deathmatch.
Wow.
And then the single player stuff a lot of times was just sort of a given. It was just, put in there. It wasn't after the fact, but it was definitely sort of
it was secondary to multiplayer.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Did you like playing deathmatch like at work? It's funny to like be like on payroll and playing something like Doom and like destroying each other.
I mean, did I like it? I mean, it was a dream job for me. I mean, I was 20 years old. I went from making, I think when I was working on cars, I was making like 15 grand a year. I mean, this is back in 1992 or 3. So, I mean, 15 grand a year was enough to have an apartment and to drive a car and, to kind of have a life. I had a PC, I had a modem, but, when I started at id, they bumped me up to $30,000 a year.
Wow.
Which at that time I thought was like, I mean, that was it. I was done. I'm like, if I kind of went in there and they said, well, we're going to pay you $30,000 a year. And I remember in the back of my mind thinking like, I'm good with this. I'm actually good with this for the rest of my life. If they want to pay me $30,000 a year to be in this environment and to build maps or, to answer the phone or whatever all day, that's fine. I can do this until I retire. So yeah, I mean, it was a really amazing experience to, be plucked out of where, a life where I'm sure I would have lived a life of obscurity, to suddenly, being in the midst of what was to become, one of the most famous FPS development houses in the world. And yeah, of course, it was great to play deathmatch all day. I mean, but we worked really hard. I mean, it was a lot of work, a lot of effort that went into the actual creation of the games, and so it took a lot out of us as well.
That's pretty amazing. The reason it's so fascinating to me is because I do Doom exclusively as a hobby. My career is I'm working in payroll for a company that provides money for that provides security services for like hospitals and shopping malls and things like that. So what I do at work is extremely boring, but I do it to make a paycheck. And then when I come home and use Doom as like an escape, when I'm like designing levels, I kind of get like my artistic fix by like designing levels and things like that. And playing Doom, just getting like, because my normal everyday life is so cushy and boring. It's fun to play something that's fast and intense and out of control like Doom. That's
the other thing that's I think really interesting about there's a dichotomy there between the sitting down and building the map and then the playing of it, and they could not be more opposite.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, on the one hand, you're sitting down and you're playing chess, and then you turn around and get into a wrestling match with somebody. So one is very cerebral. It's very contemplative. It's very relaxing. You could sit there and suddenly, sort of 3 hours will slip by without realizing it, and as you're working on something. But then when you turn around and you invite someone to play that with you, it's another kind of experience where, it can be a very intense, 30 minutes that seems like it's gone by in 2 seconds. And of course, it's full of adrenaline. And then you get your brain back on and you think, right, how am I going to fix this map and make it better? And then you spend another 3 hours making the map. So I think the back and forth there is very unique. I mean, I don't know how many other sort of disciplines combine the intellectual, architectural, 3D visualization, creativity with then turning around and having to have these very fast twitch, response, strategic thinking, fighting, thinking, and then recombining that with the creative and the layout. I think it's a really interesting combination.
Yeah, it's true. I know that from making my own maps is I'll spend maybe 8 or 9 hours working on a particular map, and then it comes to test it. And I've almost it takes a while to get into the groove of playing the game again, because I just spent so much time doing something that was a completely different type of avenue.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and of course, as the map creator, as you're playing it, it's likely that you're going to be distracted by the little things in the map that are bugging you. Meanwhile, your opponent is purely focused on killing you. So I think that, for me, also drove a lot of the way that I designed maps, because as I was designing and then I was going to test, it wasn't that I was trying to design maps that would allow me to cheat, because obviously that doesn't really, it's not really possible. I mean, you could try to put hidden passages in or something like that, but eventually someone's going to find them. But for me, when I was building maps, it was all about removing the distractions from the maps. So if the lighting was off or if the textures were misaligned and I was playing the map, I was distracted from the battle by the fact that, oh shit, that texture is off by 8 pixels, And so that would sort of drive me towards, when I was designing, being very, critical of the design in terms of lighting, texturing, layout, so that there was nothing in the map that annoyed me when I went in to play it in deathmatch. And that was how I felt I got the advantage within my own maps, was by feeling very comfortable in them. And I only felt comfortable when they were perfect.
That's cool. Speaking of deathmatch, there was in map 14 in most dens, there's a part, I don't know if you remember this, but there's you were talking a little bit about including hidden passages and secrets and stuff. There's a part in Inmost Dens where there's a rocket launcher that's in this kind of cave dungeonish type of area, and outside of that cave there's a switch that'll set off a crusher, kind of almost like an Indiana Jones type thing, when you someone tries to go for the rocket launcher, the crusher tries to kill them. Yeah. Do you remember making something like that? Was that?
Yeah, I remember that very well. I remember the first time I used that on Romero too. He was really pissed off. It was he goes to run for it, and I crushed him with it, and he was super pissed. He's like, "That's not fair. You can't do that." I'm like, "Whatever."
I can do whatever I want. I designed the level. Yeah, you're in my ground now.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's that's really fun. Designing levels with that kind of stuff in mind. What you're going. It's funny to kind of put that, because that's what I get big kick out of in when I'm designing levels, is knowing that I'm setting up this trap that's going to shock people. And in these days where people are playing Doom and streaming them live to Twitch, you can watch their first reactions when they're playing a map, and people upload their YouTube videos and Let's Plays and stuff, and you get to watch people experience these traps for the very first time, and sometimes they get angry and and because they think it's unfair. And it's kind of it's exciting for me, and it's really attractive for some other people in the Doom community. There's one guy in particular, two guys actually, Dana Babinga and Ribix, who designed this project called Sunlust. And they were very clear when they released the project that the ultra-violent skill setting is designed to be as unfair as possible.
Right.
They wanted. Well, they have a pretty high skill ceiling. They're very strong players, but they they also like very technical challenges, and they like their traps to be very deadly, and they like to see people squirm when when they're not as experienced. And that's,
so I built stuff like that when I was at id, but a lot of times it would get rejected because it would be too much, and so there's definitely a balance. And I get it. It's like there was sort of a rule that you ought to be able to, and this was one of the rules that I remember Sandy was really passionate about. It was sort of, you ought to be able to avoid death, and not feel like you've been cheated. There ought to be some hint that death may happen, and so that you should be cautious and that you should look around and try to avoid it. The idea being you don't just kill someone and then have them feeling like that was unfair, and that's it's not easy to do. It's a good rule, but it's also a very difficult rule to balance against your desire to kind of be tricky and to mess with people. So again, it's another one of those balance issues you're constantly having to think about.
Yeah, that is like one of like the level design do's and don'ts that people talk about. Is sometimes we do, like when it comes to playing custom levels where people don't really follow any sort of rules, they just kind of create whatever environment they want. There are occasionally times where you can fall into like a pit that has like burning acid and stuff in it, and there's just no way out of it. So you just sit in there and wait for your health to drain away, and there's nothing you can do about it. And when that happens, it just feels like you're being cheated. So like there's like other examples too, where some people will like create a trap where a door will open up and there's like 3 arc vials and a bunch of like chain gunners who will just kill you in a second, and there's no way you could have known that was going to happen until it happens, and then you just suffer, and then you have to start the level over again. It's a pain in the butt. I mean, there's a lot of people do tend to think everything is fair game at this point, because people have been playing Doom for 20 years now, and the skill ceiling for Doom has just gotten so high. People are creating harder and harder things all the time. There's almost no rules. But there are other people, such as myself, who think there is some consideration that's pretty important for making your levels fair for the first time you're playing through them. And I did want to talk to you about. I read somewhere that you're responsible for porting Doom levels to other game consoles like the Atari Jaguar and a couple others. Is that true? Do you remember being part of that?
Well, yeah. I mean, that was part of the work that was going on between Doom 1 and Doom 2, I think, or maybe.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it was between Doom 2 and Quake. I can't remember maybe it was between Doom 2 and Quake. But yeah, I mean, it was. It was basically a simplification of the maps in order for them to run on the Jaguar.
Yeah.
And I remember that. I think it took us as a group, like myself and Carmack and Romero. I think it took us a couple months to sort of bring everything over. But I don't remember there being anything particularly special about it. It just was a thing to do.
What are like the particular challenges of porting something to a different console?
Well, what I remember of that was a lot of stuff worked differently in terms of we didn't have as many textures to work with because there was not as much memory, and also I think the texture resolution had changed quite a bit. So it meant going into the maps and like we had to, like I was saying before, like normally if I were to build stairs, I'd have an 8 or 16 pixel lip, and I'd put a texture on the front of it. We didn't have those textures, or we only had one to use for the entire game. I remember the lighting, I think, also got simplified so that we only had some limited range of brightness to work with. So we had to go through and remove a lot of the detail in the lighting. And I think we also lost stuff, like, if I recall, I think we lost like some of the flickering type lighting and things like that as well. So it was mainly just a stripping down. I think there was also limitations on the number of enemies that could be active at any time. So we had to go through and make sure that like the enemies were sort of zoned off, and that you couldn't go through a level and like wake up a bunch of bad guys and have them trying to trail you through the map. There just wasn't enough processing power to take care of them. So it was a bunch of stuff like that. I don't remember it being particularly interesting or challenging. It was just going in and sort of dumbing down the maps.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like kind of drives me crazy. Is I was telling you earlier about how like the Doom community is kind of centric on, well, not always, but there's like a percentage of people in Doom World who take vanilla Doom very seriously, and that's designing levels within the original engine limits. And I've worked on a few projects with other people before. My most recent one is this project called Absolute Dishonor that I worked on with one guy, and he was very adamant about designing the levels to be within those vanilla constraints. And that was a problem I ran into, because I would design the maps at first, and then I would play them, and I had already put too much attention into like putting all these extra sectors to create lighting gradients and stuff like that. And the maps would crash as I was testing them. So I would have to like go in them and then compromise my vision by stripping it down and making it look kind of like a watered down version of what it really was. That's kind of disappointing when that happens, but it is something. It was a challenge though. I mean, it's interesting in that way, trying to make something work within those like kind of constraints. That's pretty exciting, and some people do get a kick out of that. They can make some pretty impressive stuff where it's almost hard to believe that it works within those limitations.
I think that may be part of what's sort of missing from from map making these days. And it's like you said, you've got people who are doing map making in a way that tries to harken back to the limitations that existed when we were doing it originally. So I think that was part of what made the design work so interesting, was that, we had these limitations, and it was, I think, a very different game then than it is now, when you can have these emulators and you can have such fast machines. And I mean, we'd sit there and wait for maps to cook, and it would take ages.
Oh yeah.
For us to be able to test our maps. So we had to be really sure that we were ready to, cook a map, or to, ask people to come and test it before we started that process, because it was time consuming. It was really costly.
Yeah, we're so privileged today. We have these new editors, and they're very user friendly, and building nodes and everything, that takes less than a second. You just click save and it's done, and you can play it right after that. So we're pretty privileged in that way. But I can imagine that being like you're pretty like focused on the level design in that way, because you have to deal with the speed of technology, and you have to put a lot more thinking and attention into it.
Back when we were doing this, the fastest machines in the office were dedicated to the level designers, basically. So I remember like when we started doing, especially when we got into BSP map making, there was a Sun, I think it was called a Spark Ultra or something like that, and so it was a server tower, a processor tower that was about maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, and
Wow.
Inside of that box were 7 or 8 processor sort of cores that could slide in and out. But at the same time, like, I don't think that even one of those, I think they were comparable in that day to like sort of high-end Pentiums, and I don't think that each processor had more than like 250 or 500 megabytes. It wasn't even that. It was some really small amount of RAM. But this was like the height of technology, and it was multi-threaded, multi-core, but it literally took up the size of like a big refrigerator, right?
Wow.
But when we send our maps over to be cooked on that, we still were looking at a fair amount of time.
Wow, that's so funny to think about. Because
I mean,
we have like better processors like that. We're just carrying them around in our pockets as cell phones.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We carry them around in our pockets now, but back in the day, these things took up space the size of a refrigerator and then some. And at the same time, it still took you had a considerable wait time. You could get up, go and cook a hot pocket, come back, and your map would still be cooking. So I mean, it was wasn't a fast process at all. But I also think it's sort of like how people talk about the difference between shooting on film and then shooting digital. When film was expensive and when processing your film, you had to send it off and you had to wait for it to come back. I think people tended to be a lot more careful about the pictures that they took. They were more considered in their setup and their lighting and making sure they had all their settings right and everything. Of course, nowadays, on your phone, you can take 1,000 pictures in a minute, and you can then go and choose which one is the right one. So I think it's sort of similar.
Yeah, we do like output challenges and stuff here in the Doom community. We have like speed mapping events. So this is an event where a bunch of people will get together, maybe like on Skype or on Discord and stuff, and they'll talk to each other, and then they'll start a timer, and they have 100 minutes to design a level. And that's really all you need these days because our machines are so fast, and we can save them and test them within that amount of time. And we do get some like pretty short maps that way. But it's interesting that like you can create new content in that short amount of time, and you can actually get for most people, depending on the amount of monsters and stuff they use, you can get like almost like an hour's worth of gameplay for the player, like spending only 100 minutes designing the map. It's pretty amazing. Right. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing lately. I understand you're in Shanghai right now.
Yep, I've been living in China now. I just passed my 11th year in Shanghai, and wow. I was in Hong Kong for 2 years prior to that. So I've been out here for 13 years in China.
That's pretty awesome. What was attractive about China to you? Like about moving out there? What was?
Mostly the Chinese food.
Yeah.
good Chinese food. Yeah. No. So I took a job in Hong Kong. Way back, 12, 13 years ago, mainly because I did want to just get out of the States. I'd had a chance to move to Japan some years prior to that, and I passed it up, and I always regretted it. I always had this attraction to and affinity to, trying life in Asia. And so when this second opportunity to move out to Asia came up, it wasn't a good one. It was to work on a game called Bad Day LA, which I think has now gone down in history as one of the worst games ever made.
Oh,
but
no.
That was the offer. Was the guys said, hey, come out here and help us finish this train wreck that we've got underway, and so I jumped at the chance, and that got me to Hong Kong. And then once I was in Hong Kong, I started traveling to mainland China, and at that time, 10, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, it was radically different from how it is today. There really wasn't a game development community per se here, and for sure there was no independent game development community. And I got the idea that if I started a studio in China, I would be able to attract a lot of really talented people who wanted to work on original content, but that there was no opportunity for them to work on original content. All of the business at that time was focused on outsourcing. So, when you play Medal of Honor, or Call of Duty, or Need for Speed, or any of these big games, a lot of the content that you're playing is actually built in China. But that content is built in these outsourcing, companies. And so I thought, well, I can help these guys get out of the outsourcing business and work on original games.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So that was how I got the idea to start my studio. There was a thing called Game Tap in the U.S., game service, games on demand type of service, and they offered me money to build an original game, and so that was what gave me the funding to start the studio, and that brought me out. We built Grimm. A few years later, we built the Alice game, and then for the last 5 years, we were working on mobile free-to-play games. But last year, around this time, I closed the studio down after 10 years.
That's pretty awesome. I get the impression that you're, from looking at like Grimm and Alice, and I get the impression you're into like that kind of like Tim Burton-esque type of like Alice in Wonderland type stuff. Is that something that you've always wanted to do?
I've got into a space where I'm a little bit kind of pigeonholed there, because there's an audience out there of people who really like the Alice games, who kind of don't want anything else. And actually my studio, Bad Day LA was a good example. Bad Day LA was a is a good example instead of a bad game of, my trying to come up with different stories and art styles. So I mean, I definitely have a lot of other ideas, and if you look at what we did at Spicy Horse, so like Big Head Bash and Akinero, there's a lot of art styles and a lot of different ways, and a lot of that stuff, was story and art that I came up with. So I think, part of it is there's this big fan base out there that wants Twisted Fairy Tale stuff. The other part is that when I do stuff that's not Twisted Fairy Tales, no one really pays attention. So sort of stuck there.
Well, what is your ideal kind of like video game genre or style or whatever? Like, what kind of motifs do you like?
So if you ask me, like, what do I play? What have I poured the most hours into? I would say top of the list is going to be stuff like Fallout.
Oh, okay.
GTA. I really like the BioShock series. I mean, I like, sort of dark storytelling type games. I mean, I like sort of open world stuff, even though I would never want to work on an open world game. I just think they're just crazy, like how big they are in terms of development. But just as a player, I quite like the big open world games like Skyrim and things like that.
Is that the kind of stuff you would work on? Like, let's say you had an infinite budget and all the time in the world and no reputation to live up to. Like, what kind of is that? Like, those are the type of games that you would probably want to work towards?
Yeah, no, I would just take the money and run off and go sailing for the rest of my life. Yeah. I mean, if somebody came along and gave me a ton of money and a good team, I don't know. It's really weird. Like, I don't really think about game development like that. I don't walk around. So,
well, it's kind of like a career, I guess. Then, so it's not. I guess not like a hobby passion type thing. It's a little different.
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is that my ideas are kind of worthless. Like everybody can have game design ideas, and I think that where you find the magic is in the compromise, like we were talking about before. So it could be a technology compromise, or it could be a time and budget compromise. So, like, if you look at the game that I started Spicy Horse with, Grimm, it wasn't like I had been walking around with the idea for Grimm in my head for years prior. Grimm only came about because I was told, you have $3 million, you've got 2 years, you've got to make an episodic game of at least 24 episodes. Go do it, right? And so there was the constraints. That was the space in which I had to work. And then inside of those constraints is where I came up with the idea for Grimm. Alice was actually quite similar. EA came to me and said, you can make a game, but you've got this much time and you've got to work with this technology. And that was where, Alice was born out of. It wasn't necessarily that I was walking around thinking like, oh man, my whole life I've wanted to make an Alice game. So I imagine if you came to me and said, you've got infinite time and money, whatever I'd make at that point would be really shit. I think constraints are really important. I think constraints are what make projects interesting,
Yeah. Did you think that episodic structure was conducive to like making good gameplay for something like Alice and Grimm? Or
episodic was really cool. And if you look at Grimm, I actually think Grimm was a really interesting kind of case study in the evolution of a team's technical and artistic ability as they became more comfortable with the technology. So, we were using the Unreal Engine. If you look at the initial maps that we built, they were quite simple. The gameplay was quite simple, but if you stuck with it through to the 24th episode, by the 24th episode, things got really interesting. The team were really comfortable with the tools, and they were really comfortable with the format. And of course, by that point, no one was playing the game anymore. So it still was a thing where if you thought about like, okay, well, at that point, if we up until that point, we had never released anything as an episodic game, but the team had been building all that stuff. And then we said, okay, right, now we're going to spend the next year building the actual game. That actual game would have been pretty damn good because we spent 2 years sort of figuring it out. And then the project was over. So and I think that's how a lot of game development goes, actually. It's always the like one of the rules, like when we built the last Alice game, one of the rules was we're going to build the first couple of levels in the game last. And I know a lot of development teams do that because they know that the first thing the player is going to see should be the last thing that you built, because the last thing you built is always going to be better than the first thing that you built.
Yeah, like working within constraints can be like really, it's a very it kind of like drives your creativity because you have to like work with those certain rules. I know from experience, like the levels. I was talking to this guy from Doom World, Purist, the other day, about how the maps that I've designed for Doom, the ones that I enjoy the most are the ones I spent the least amount of time on. And I think like the pressure of like trying to create a map within that short amount of time, those maps somehow just come out the best. But like when I work with, and he was mentioning to me is that sometimes the maps that he works on, he'll spend like maybe 2 hours on it, and then he'll table it and then come back to it next time he's available to work on it, which might be a few days from there. And then he'll look at the map and not like remember where he left off. And then the process just kind of compounds and it just takes longer and longer. And by the time he's actually finished the map, the design process was just so frustrating and disappointing that it felt like work. And by the time he was finished, he wasn't even proud of it. And I kind of run into that same experience myself, is that when I kind of limit myself to like I can only make a map that's this size or something, that forces me to think creatively, how can I expand the map to make it look as interesting as possible without going past these boundaries. And it creates a pretty fun experience.
I think some of the maps that people think about that I did they like the most, like DM4 and Quake again. I mean, I built DM4 in one day, and
wow.
I remember building it and then having the other guys be like, "No way, did you finish this today?" I was like, "No, it's done." Like I came in the morning, I started building it, and by that afternoon we were testing it, and at that point in my level design sort of skills, I was really, really, really fast. And I would build stuff and throw it away and build stuff and throw it away. But it was like always sketching until I got the right sketch. And then we would test. And then if the test was all right, I would detail it out. Wow. And I think that's really important. And the same thing is true, I think, with a lot of stuff, whether it's art or with writing. It's all about getting really comfortable with the tools. The tools are not in your way anymore. And then having a very clear idea about, or not even a clear idea, but just an ability to start with a point in space and flesh it out, and don't let anything get in the way of doing that. And you're just in that kind of flow moment. And then a lot of times what you end up with is really, really good, and you haven't even really thought about it.
Yeah, that's amazing to think about, that you having designed that deathmatch level in such a short amount of time. I mean, people, when they play Quake, they still play those maps today. It's amazing to think like how little time you committed to designing the map, and how many exponentially more hours of gameplay that people got out of it. That's pretty wild to think about. Oh man, that's really fascinating. I understand. You told me you have a bit of a Kickstarter going on right now, right?
Yeah, I just launched something called Out of the Woods. And
yeah, what is that about?
It is a collection of fairy tales. Again, going back to the fairy tale world, and that is 10 fairy tales presented as a physical card game. An illustrated book of fairy tales, and also a collection of art and a coloring book and some other stuff like that. So after having made digital games for the last 24 years, this last year has been kind of a break for me, and I've just been enjoying kind of slowing down and then working on more like story written book card type stuff. I don't know if I'm going to get back into the digital stuff anytime soon, but this is the thing that's going on right now. So anybody out there is into Kickstarters and likes Twisted Fairy Tale stuff, then I would say they could go and check that out.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. Was it like inspired by anything? Like what would what other things that you saw that like kind of gave you the idea to do this?
So at its core, the reason that this project exists is that the last 12 months of my life have actually been really, really difficult. I encountered a number of, I guess what you would call life-changing events.
Oh, that's right.
Trauma or tragedies. things that kind of you'd kind of think they came out of the blue, but like as I examined what happened and why, you start to realize that in life we are constantly making decisions which can sort of pile up and lead to negative consequences. Put it that way. And I was kind of looking around trying to figure out, like, how did I end up here? How did I end up thinking that I was doing the right thing and going down the right path, and then wind up sort of in hell? And so that was what got me thinking about these fairy tales and the fact that in a lot of these fairy tales, you've got these lessons about life, these moral lessons. And that's what fairy tales were originally there for, was to teach us, don't talk to strangers, or, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
They all sound kind of cliche, but the fact is that if you don't sort of watch out and you don't take care of your business and keep your life sort of on track and have a sense about where you're going, you can end up off in the lava. And so Out of the Woods is these 10 fairy tales presented alongside an examination of the lessons contained within. And the hope is that if you're playing the game or you're reading the book, you might get a kind of reminder as to what sort of pitfalls there are in life if we don't take care.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. That's are these games that are they kind of like a solitary game, or do you play them with other people?
The closest thing would be Uno. I'm a big fan of Uno. I've been since I was a kid. So we took Uno. We took a couple other games. We kind of mashed them together. We stuck all the fairy tale art and story stuff on top of them. And so, yeah, the Kickstarter offers you the game, which is the card game, which you can play like 2 to 4 players, or probably even 6 players. There's the illustrated storybook, which is really kind of for adults, but I think adults could read it to kids. And then there's a coloring book, and there's some art prints, and there's some other stuff. So,
that's pretty cool. So I was wondering if I thought it was like more of like an adult type of thing, but I guess not. It's I guess like it's pretty user friendly even for kids and stuff too. It doesn't have like all these complicated rules. It's not like playing Risk or Monopoly or something.
No. The card game itself, the rules are pretty simple. I mean, all we've done is taken kind of the Uno rule set. We just made it a little bit more brutal. You're supposed to get rid of your cards before anyone else, but like where Uno, you would actually call out to the other players that you're down to your last card. In Out of the Woods, you don't do that. So, and there's also a lot more chance for you to screw over the other players. So you can play sort of a block card that makes them take their cards back. You can play reverse cards that makes them eat whatever kind of action card they just tried to play against you.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of ways in there that you can screw the other player. And that's sort of part of the point. It's like, keeping you on your toes and making you realize that, life is not a simple walk through the woods.
That's pretty awesome. It's a cool thing, man.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy with it. But, we still need people to jump in there and support it. We got past our 50% line yesterday. So 5 days into the campaign, we hit 50% of our funding goal. We still have 26 days to go, so I'd like to think we're going to hit our goal, but it's a scary thing. Like, we may get within a short distance of it and fail. So yeah. If anybody
always like that with Kickstarter,
like this kind of stuff, please go back it.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of fans here on Doom World and around the Doom community. People love your work. So definitely back that Kickstarter up, man. Out of the Woods is pretty awesome. It sounds like a really fun, cool thing. So like, what's the idea? Like, once this gets released, is it going to be like in like shopping mall, like department stores and stuff where people can pick it up on shelves and things like that?
Yeah. So I've got an online shop where people can buy stuff that's kind of inspired by my previous, like the Alice games, especially.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to sell it there. I just put the link in the chat. It's called Mysterious. That's actually the name of my new company. I don't know how it's possible, but there was not anybody sitting on the company name Mysterious in the United States. So somehow I ended up with Mysterious Inc. But so
That's
yeah,
amazing.
Mysterious is my new company. That's where this project lives. That's where my online store lives. So they can buy it there. And we've also heard that there's some retailers that are really interested in this already. So if we're lucky, it'll actually go to retail. But before all that happens, someone people need to go out and back the Kickstarter, because that's what's going to make it happen initially. And then based on the success of that, then yeah, we'll be selling it online and we'll sell it at retail.
That's pretty awesome. I know Sandy Peterson does like card games and board games and stuff like that. Did you get any inspiration from him and like his kind of like Lovecraftian type of style?
Yeah, well, he's running a Kickstarter right now. Actually, it's another one of his Cthulhu games, and it looks like it's doing really, really well.
Ooh.
So I think he's made a really good business out of that. I mean, there's tons of these on Kickstarter. There's so many card games and so many board games. It's not even funny. When we were reaching out to some of the websites that cover these games and saying, "Hey, we're going to launch this," they were telling us, "Yeah, you need to get in touch with us like 6 or 8 months before you launch your Kickstarter, because their schedules are so full that there are just so many people launching card and board games every day." That the space is too crowded. I didn't really realize that until we launched and we were trying to do to get some press lined up, and everybody was just saying like, yeah, it's a really crazy space. Like there's so many people involved in it. And then there are people like Sandy who've been very successful with it. So it's my first, attempt to go into it. It's not my first Kickstarter, but for sure it's my first attempt to do something in this space. So yeah, any support that your listeners could lend would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, that would be awesome. A lot of people love your work, and I'd really like to see your Kickstarter kick off and actually become a success. That sounds really cool. It's a very cool idea.
Well, I hope if it's successful that it becomes a series. I'd really love to do a series of books, each book having 10 tales, and each of the tales then having some of the lessons that are contained within, and of course doing all the fun artwork and maybe building additional games around that. I think there's a lot to be done in that space, and I've even thought before about doing like a really graphically illustrated Bible. This was an idea that I used to discuss with Marilyn Manson, that he wanted to do an illustrated Bible, and I still think that would be a really fun project. So I think this could kind of lead up to that, like do a series of books on fairy tales with all the moral lessons contained within, and then maybe work into some of the other sort of well-known books of works of fiction, you might say, like the Bible.
Yeah,
it could make for a really interesting collection.
Yeah, it sounds pretty crazy. It's funny to imagine what an illustrated Bible would even look like. It's a funny idea. Yeah, that's cool that you're planning on the series and stuff. That's pretty awesome. So I'm really glad I got to talk to you. This was really fun. It was a very interesting experience, and hearing your perspective and what it was like being part of id Software and what you think about game design and what you're doing now and all that kind of stuff. It's very fascinating. I talked to, or I didn't talk to, but I heard, a few years ago, John Romero released a new Doom level. He designed a new Doom level, I guess, in practice for his new game Black Room, and he released another level after that. And I heard through the grapevine, I think it was on Facebook, Tom Hall mentioned that he was going to that he was possibly going to design a new level. He said he had a dream about a new Doom level that he designed, and he thought about making it maybe for Doom's 25th anniversary. Does that sound like something that you might want to try? Maybe like try designing a new Doom level with the new technology we have today, and without all those kind of crazy limitations that we had to deal with in the past?
Yeah, I think that'd be really fun. I mean, somehow, like in the lead up to this, I started looking at a lot of the guys on Twitter who were doing Doom and Quake maps. And I mean, like I said, when we started the conversation, I saw some really impressive, really interesting stuff. But for me, for sure, it's going to take some time to get back into it. I don't think I could just sit down and crank out something interesting. I imagine there's probably a couple weeks or months of reacquainting myself with the technology and with, the building process.
Yeah.
But it sounds like a lot of fun. I really would like to. And as I mentioned, I think I had it on Twitter today. I said, I keep having this recurring thought to build, a pack of maps around Gothic style levels and lava. that's been something I've dreamt of for a very long time.
Wow.
And so yeah, maybe there's a way to make something like that happen. When is the anniversary?
It's December 10th. I think we're coming up on the 24th anniversary. So the 25th will be after that. So I still have
over a year to practice.
Yeah, you'll have time. There's plenty of resources for you to use. A lot of people use this Doom editor called GZ Doom Builder, which is it's a bit resource intensive if you have an older computer, which I don't know if you do, but some people do. Considering we're all Doom fans, we use old technology sometimes. But it is kind of resource intensive, but it's very user friendly and very quick. It kind of bypasses a lot of the things that might have been a problem in the past. Like if you make like an unclosed sector, the thing will automatically close the sector for you, and it'll apply textures, and it has other cool tools like automatic stair generation and like auto aligning textures and things like that. And the community would be very happy to design new textures for you to use if you wanted to use something outside of the stock Doom assets. So that I'm sure a lot of people would be like they would feel very honored to work with you and a map that you want to make.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you and of them. Maybe first step is I'll go and grab this editor, and I'm looking at the website now, and take a stab at this. It's probably something I have to start after this Kickstarter is.
Focus on that first.
Yep.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of time right now, but I think that could be a lot of fun. So I'll keep following the community on Twitter, and I'll take a look at the editor, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, and check out Doomworld once in a while. Doomworld.com. That's basically the centralized place for all like Doom information. I know John Romero has an account there. He doesn't post very often, but it's a great place to check out to see what people are up to, like what levels they're designing and what they're talking about and stuff. And if you have anything that you could use Doom fan support from Doom fans or anything like it's like a Kickstarter like this, or if you just want to share if you just to stop by and say hi or something, people would love that. It's a very great place, and if you make an account there, just like say hi once in a while, that would be awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, thanks again, American. It was really fun talking to you. This is a very interesting experience, and hearing about what you're up to and all that stuff. It's been really fun.
Yeah, John, I really appreciate the invitation and the guys that have joined in to listen today. And if you guys don't mind throwing a little support at Out of the Woods, that would be very helpful.
Oh yeah, we sure would.
We'll see if there's something we can't do before the upcoming anniversary. I think that sounds like a lot of fun.
All right, cool, American. All right, I guess we can wrap this up then. Thank you, Space Marines, for listening. I don't know who I'm talking to next on my next episode. Let me check my calendar real quick. But I have more episodes coming up. I talked to Sean Green recently, and I might be talking to him next month. And
please tell him I said hello. He was the guy sitting next to me in the tech support phone room for my first 6 months at ID. He and I were the ones that answered the phones. So that was my buddy answering phones for quite a while there.
That's awesome. Oh yeah, I did want to ask you that. Do you keep in touch with anybody from id Software anymore?
Not really.
Not really? You guys went your separate ways?
Well, no, I mean, I live in China, so...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Everybody's really far away, yeah. Not really. I don't really keep in touch with people back in the States much, period. I mean, once you leave and, you move somewhere thousands of miles away, you tend to lose touch with people pretty quickly.
Yeah, I understand that. I noticed that when I moved into my first house. I was away from my childhood friends, and that's just what happens. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks again, American. It was awesome. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you like the show, check it out on YouTube. I have the World Extermination Radio YouTube channel. Subscribe to that. Check that out. And if you want to listen to more live shows, follow me on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/J40ounce, J_40OZ. And the links will be in the YouTube descriptions for MP3 downloads if you want to listen to them like in your car or on your MP3 player or whatever. And follow American McGee and contribute to his Kickstarter for Out of the Woods. And we'll see you next time. All right, we're off air.
All right, John. Thank you so much.
That was awesome, man. I had a lot of fun.